The crack of the whip had not yet split the morning air when Garrett Jennings pushed through the gathered crowd, his calloused hands already reaching for the knife at his belt. The orc woman, bound to the whipping post in the village square, stood with her broad shoulders squared despite the iron shackles cutting into her green-skinned wrists, her small tusks visible as she kept her jaw clenched in defiance. Blood already trickled from a cut above her pointed ear where someone had struck her during the binding, and the crowd jeered with a hatred that made Garrett's stomach turn, even as the executioner raised his arm for the first lash. "Stop this," Garrett said, his voice cutting through the noise as he stepped between the executioner and the prisoner. The larger man, a brute named Wallace who served as the village enforcer, lowered his whip with confusion twisting his scarred face. "Step aside, farmer," Wallace growled. "This creature attacked Thomas Miller's son. She deserves every stripe and more." Garrett kept his eyes on Wallace even as he felt the weight of 36 hostile stares boring into his back. "I know Thomas Miller's son. The boy is a liar and a thief who has been caught tormenting travelers on the North Road twice before. I will take responsibility for this woman. Release her into my custody." The murmuring of the crowd grew louder, angrier. Garrett recognized most of these faces from market days and harvest festivals, neighbors who had always treated him with respect for his service in the border wars and the prosperity of his farm. Now they looked at him like he had lost his mind. "You would defend an orc?" Someone shouted from the back. "I would defend the truth," Garrett replied steadily. "And I would prevent an injustice in our village square. Miller's boy tried to rob her. She defended herself and showed more mercy than most would have by only knocking him unconscious instead of breaking his worthless neck." Wallace's face darkened. "You calling Thomas Miller a liar?" "I am calling his son a liar, which Thomas himself knows perfectly well even if his pride will not let him admit it publicly." Garrett turned his attention to the orc woman for the first time since he had stepped forward. Her eyes were the color of amber, sharp with intelligence and pain both physical and deeper. She watched him with obvious suspicion, as if waiting for the trap to spring shut. "What is your name?" She hesitated before answering, her voice rougher than a human woman's but carrying a dignity that the jeering crowd lacked. "Zurga." "Zurga," Garrett repeated, letting the unfamiliar name settle on his tongue. "Did you attack an unarmed boy without provocation?" "No." The single word carried absolute certainty. "Did you defend yourself when attacked?" "Yes." "Did you kill him?" "No." Something almost like bitter amusement flickered in those amber eyes. "Though your kind would have killed me for far less." Garrett turned back to Wallace and raised his voice so the entire square could hear. "I claim the old law. Any man may take responsibility for a prisoner's debt to society by offering surety. I offer my land and my oath. Release her to my custody for 1 year. If she commits any crime in that time, my farm is forfeit to the village. If she causes no trouble, all charges are dropped and she goes free." The crowd erupted. Wallace looked uncertain now, glancing toward the village elder who stood on the steps of the meeting hall. The old man, a white-haired merchant named Cornelius who had grown wealthy on fair dealing, descended slowly and approached Garrett with searching eyes. "You would stake everything on an orc's honor?" Cornelius asked quietly. "I would stake everything on my own judgment," Garrett replied, "which served this village well enough when I helped defend it from raiders 5 years past. I ask only what the law allows." Cornelius studied him for a long moment, then turned to examine Zurga with equal intensity. She met his gaze without flinching, though Garrett could see the tension in her muscular frame, the way her fingers curled despite the shackles. Finally, the elder sighed. "The law is clear, even if rarely invoked. I accept your surety, Garrett Jennings. The orc woman is your responsibility for 1 year from this day. If she flees, you will face the punishment meant for her. If she commits violence, you share her guilt. Do you understand? I understand and accept these terms. Cornelius gestured to Wallace, who looked deeply unhappy, but could not argue with the elder's decision. He approached Zurga and unlocked her shackles with unnecessarily rough movements, deliberately twisting the iron so it scraped against her already raw wrists. She did not make a sound, but Garrett saw her jaw tighten. "Get her out of my sight," Wallace muttered. "Both of you." Garrett met Zurga's eyes and tilted his head toward the edge of the square. She followed him without a word, and the crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow, their faces twisted with disgust and confusion. Garrett kept his shoulders back and his pace steady, refusing to show the uncertainty that churned in his gut. He had just wagered his life's work on a stranger, an orc no less, based on nothing more than his gut feeling and his knowledge of Billy Miller's rotten character. They walked in silence through the village and out onto the north road. Garrett's farm lay 3 miles distant, a prosperous spread of wheat fields and vegetable gardens with a sturdy 2-story house he had built himself after leaving military service. The morning sun climbed higher as they walked, and he became increasingly aware of the blood drying on Zurga's temple, the way she held herself with rigid control that suggested she was in more pain than she showed. "There is a stream just ahead," he said when the village had disappeared behind the curve of the road. "You should clean that wound before it festers." Zurga stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Standing this close without the distraction of the mob, Garrett realized she was nearly his height, which made her tall for a woman of any race. Her clothing was travel-worn but well-made, leather and wool suited for the road, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to taking care of herself. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why should you clean the wound? Because infection is. Why did you do that?" Zurga interrupted. "Why stake your farm for a stranger, for an orc?" Garrett considered his answer carefully. "Because it was unjust. Because I know Billy Miller, and I know you were telling the truth. Because I fought in the border wars and saw enough violence to last a lifetime, and I am sick of watching people cheer for more of it in the village square. Noble reasons." Her tone suggested she did not quite believe him. "But you do not know me. I could be everything they said. I could slit your throat the moment you turn your back." "You could," Garrett agreed, "but you will not." "How can you be certain?" "Because if you were the kind of person who would do that, you would have killed Billy Miller when he tried to rob you instead of just knocking him out." Garrett gestured toward the stream. "Please, clean your wound. Then we will go to my farm and figure out the particulars of this arrangement." Zurga studied him for a moment longer, then moved toward the stream without another word. She knelt beside the water and cupped her hands to bring the cold liquid to her face, washing away the dried blood with efficient movements. Garrett kept a respectful distance, looking out over the fields that bordered the road and wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. The farm came into view as they crested the final hill, and Garrett felt the familiar swell of pride at the sight of it. The wheat stood golden and healthy in the south field, nearly ready for harvest. The vegetable garden closer to the house showed neat rows of beans, squash, and potatoes. The house itself was solid timber with a stone chimney, surrounded by a well-maintained fence and several outbuildings including a barn, chicken coop, and workshop. "You live here alone?" Zurga asked, speaking for the first time since the stream. "Yes, my wife died 3 years ago. Fever." Garrett did not elaborate, and she did not press. "I manage with hired help during planting and harvest, but otherwise I work it myself." They entered through the main gate, and Garrett led her to the house. The interior was clean but sparse. practical furniture, and few decorations beyond some pottery his late wife Martha had made, and a sword mounted above the fireplace from his military days. Zurga's eyes went immediately to the sword, and he saw recognition in her expression. "You were a soldier," she said, "for 8 years. Infantry and then cavalry. I fought in the Borderlands campaigns." Garrett moved to the kitchen area and began pumping water into a basin. "Which means I know orcs are not mindless monsters, whatever the village gossips want to believe. I fought alongside orc scouts twice when our interests aligned against common enemies. They kept their word better than some of the human mercenaries we employed." Zurga's expression shifted slightly, something between surprise and cautious respect. "You are a strange man, Garrett Jennings." "So I have been told." He gestured to a chair at the wooden table. "Sit. Let me look at that cut properly." She hesitated, then sat with visible reluctance. Garrett gathered clean cloth and a jar of salve he kept for minor injuries, then approached carefully, giving her time to object. When she remained still, he gently dabbed away the remaining blood and examined the wound. It was not deep, but it would need to be kept clean. "This might sting," he warned before applying the salve. She did not flinch, though he saw her hands tighten on her knees. He worked quickly and efficiently, his touch as gentle as possible, then stepped back. "It should heal clean. Change the bandage daily." "I know how to tend wounds," Zurga said, but her tone lacked hostility. She reached up to touch the bandage carefully. "Thank you." The words seemed to cost her something, and Garrett understood. Pride was difficult to swallow, especially for someone who had been tied to a whipping post an hour ago. He moved to the stove and began preparing food, suddenly aware that he had not eaten breakfast and suspecting she had not either. "We should establish some ground rules," he said as he worked, slicing bread and cheese and fetching smoked meat from the cold box. "You are free to move about the farm, but for both our sakes, I ask that you not go into the village without me, at least for the first few months. People need time to calm down." "I have no desire to visit your village," Zurga said flatly. "Good, that makes it easier." Garrett set food on the table between them. "There is a small room off the barn that I use for storage. I can clear it out and make it suitable for sleeping." "You will have privacy and your own space," she frowned. "You expect me to work." "I expect we will both work. This is a farm. There is always work to be done and harvest is coming. I would be a fool to house and feed someone for a year without asking for help, and you would be a fool to sit idle and let resentment build." He met her eyes directly. "But I will not treat you as a slave. You will eat what I eat, rest when you need rest, and be compensated fairly for your labor. At the end of the year, you will leave here with enough money to go wherever you wish." Zurga picked up a piece of bread, examining it as if searching for poison. "Why would you do this? There must be a reason beyond your distaste for injustice." Garrett considered deflecting, then decided honesty would serve better than evasion. "Because this farm is too much for one man, and I am tired of being alone. Because I think you need a place to rest as much as I need help. Because maybe, just maybe, if people see an orc and a human working together peacefully, some of them might reconsider their prejudices." He paused. "And because my wife would have skinned me alive if I had stood by and watched them whip you for defending yourself." Something softened in Zurga's expression, just barely, but enough for Garrett to notice. She bit into the bread, chewed thoughtfully, then spoke around the mouthful. "Your wife sounds like she was a good woman. She was the best person I ever knew." They ate in silence for a while, the tension gradually easing into something more comfortable. Garrett found himself noticing details he had missed in the chaos of the village square. The way Zurga's pointed ears twitched slightly at small sounds, always alert. the old scars on her hands that spoke of hard living and harder fights, the carefully controlled way she moved, as if always prepared to defend herself at a moment's notice. "I was traveling south to the coast," she said eventually, "looking for work on the ships. I thought perhaps among sailors I might find less prejudice." She laughed bitterly. "I should have gone around your village instead of through it. Billy Miller haunts the North Road specifically because it is the main route south. You were unlucky." Garrett pushed the plate of cheese toward her. "Have you sailed before?" "No, but I am strong and I learn quickly. I thought it worth trying." She took some cheese, her movements becoming slightly less guarded. "I left my clan 6 months ago. We lived in the Iron Peak Mountains, but I did not agree with their ways. They wanted to raid human settlements to take by force what we needed. I argued for trade instead. They called me weak, corrupted by human thinking." "It takes more strength to choose peace than violence," Garrett said quietly. "That is something I learned in the wars." Zurga looked at him with those amber eyes, and for the first time, he saw something other than suspicion or defiance in them. Curiosity, perhaps, or the faint beginning of trust. The days that followed fell into a steady rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Garrett cleared the storage room as promised, bringing in a proper bed frame and mattress, a small table, and even a wash basin. Zurga watched him work with an expression he could not quite read, then helped him carry the heavier furniture without being asked. Her strength was considerable, and she moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to physical labor. They worked the fields together as harvest time approached. Garrett showed her which wheat was ready for cutting and which needed more time, how to bind the sheaves properly, where to stack them for drying. Zurga absorbed the information quickly and rarely needed to be told something twice. She worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, though Garrett made sure to call regular breaks for water and rest. In the evenings, they took their meals together at the kitchen table. The conversation started brief and practical, discussions of the next day's work or observations about the weather. But gradually, they began to expand. Zurga told him about life in the Iron Peak clan, the harsh beauty of the mountains, the complicated politics between different orc tribes. Garrett spoke of his time in the military, the friends he had lost, the disillusionment that had eventually sent him back to the land his father had farmed before him. "Martha thought I was crazy when I said I wanted to leave the army and become a farmer," he said one night, 3 weeks into their arrangement. "She was a city girl, daughter of a merchant, but she learned to love it here," said the quiet helped her think. "You must miss her terribly," Zurga said softly. "Every day. But the grief is gentler now than it was. Time does not heal exactly, but it makes the pain bearable." Garrett looked out the window at the darkening fields. "She would have liked you, I think." She had no patience for stupidity or injustice either. Zurga smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and made Garrett's breath catch unexpectedly. "I wish I could have met her." The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. The wariness had faded into something warmer, a companionship that grew stronger with each shared meal and long day of work. When the first frost threatened in late autumn, Garrett showed Zurga how to harvest the remaining vegetables and prepare the fields for winter. They worked side by side in the garden, and he became aware of her proximity in a way that had nothing to do with caution and everything to do with the warmth of her presence, the sound of her occasional laughter when he made a joke, the way the setting sun caught the green of her skin and made it almost luminous. He pushed the thoughts away, telling himself he was being foolish. She was his responsibility, someone he had pledged to protect. Developing feelings beyond friendship would be a betrayal of the trust that had slowly built between them. Besides, she would leave when the year ended. That was the agreement, but the feelings refused to be dismissed entirely. They lurked at the edges of his awareness, surfacing when Zurga smiled at him over breakfast or when her hand accidentally brushed his while reaching for the same tool. He saw the same confusion in her eyes sometimes, a flicker of something that might have been attraction quickly suppressed. Winter arrived in earnest, bringing snow that blanketed the farm in white silence. The work moved indoors to the workshop, where Garrett taught Zurga carpentry and basic blacksmithing. She had a natural aptitude for both, her strong hands learning to shape wood and metal with increasing skill. They made repairs to the furniture, crafted new tools for spring planting, and built additional storage boxes for the root cellar. The close quarters of the workshop, warmed by the forge and smelling of sawdust and hot metal, created an intimacy that both of them seemed to feel. They worked in comfortable silence much of the time, but Garrett found himself hyper-aware of every movement she made, every breath, every unconscious hum of satisfaction when she completed a piece to her standards. "You are a good teacher," Zurga said one afternoon as she examined a chair leg she had just finished shaping. "Patient. My clan did not believe in patience. Everything was done with anger and force." "Force has its place, but craftsmanship requires gentleness," Garrett replied, running his hand over the smooth wood. "You have to respect the material, work with its nature rather than against it." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite decipher. "Is that how you see people too?" "Work with their nature, I suppose so. I learned in the military that you cannot force men to be brave. You can only give them something worth being brave for." He met her eyes and found himself unable to look away. "And I learned that strength comes in many forms. Some of the strongest people I knew were the ones who chose kindness when they could have chosen cruelty. Like cutting down an orc woman before the first lash," Zurga asked quietly, "like sparing the life of a stupid boy who tried to rob you." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Then Zurga turned back to her work, but Garrett saw the faint flush that darkened the green of her cheeks and his heart beat faster. The solstice came, and with it the longest night of the year. Garrett had always marked the occasion simply, but this year he decided to make a proper celebration. He cooked a feast with the best of their stored food, opened a bottle of wine he had been saving, and even strung some candles around the main room to drive back the winter darkness. Zurga emerged from the barn wearing a dress Garrett had never seen before, deep blue wool that she must have made herself during the long winter evenings. It suited her beautifully, and he found himself staring before he caught himself and looked away embarrassed. "You look lovely," he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Thank you." She seemed equally flustered. "You cleaned up nicely yourself." He had indeed put on his best shirt and pants, even trimmed his beard properly for the first time in weeks. They stood there awkwardly for a moment before Garrett gestured to the table. "Shall we eat before everything gets cold?" The meal was excellent, the wine smooth and warming. They talked more freely than ever before, the conversation ranging from philosophy to silly stories from their pasts. Zurga described a disastrous attempt to learn swimming as a child that ended with her being fished out of a lake by her exasperated mother. Garrett recounted the time he and his fellow soldiers had accidentally gotten their captain drunk on what they thought was weak beer, but turned out to be distilled spirits. "He promoted all of us the next day because he could not remember which ones were responsible," Garrett said, laughing at the memory. "And he was too proud to admit he had been that drunk, so he just pretended it was a reward for good service." Zurga laughed too, the sound rich and genuine, and Garrett realized he had never heard her laugh so freely before. It made him want to spend the rest of his life finding ways to make her laugh like that again, The thought sobered him. The rest of his life. When had he started thinking in such terms? "What is wrong?" Zurga asked, noticing his change in mood. "Nothing. I just realized how much I have enjoyed these past months. I had forgotten what it was like to have someone to share things with." He refilled their wine glasses, needing something to do with his hands. "When you leave in the spring, I think I will miss you very much." Zurga's expression grew serious. "Must I leave?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Garrett set down the wine bottle carefully, his heart hammering. "The agreement was for 1 year. After that, you are free to go wherever you wish. I will not hold you here against your will." "That is not what I asked." Zurga leaned forward, her amber eyes intense. "I asked if I must leave. Not if I am free to leave. Those are different questions." Garrett's mouth went dry. "Zurga, I do not want to presume anything. You came here as my responsibility, someone I had to protect. I would never want you to feel obligated to stay because of gratitude or some sense of debt." "What if obligation has nothing to do with it?" She reached across the table and took his hand, her calloused palm warm against his. "What if I want to stay because I have found something here I did not know I was looking for? What if I have come to care for you as more than just the man who saved me from the whipping post?" Garrett's breath caught. He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers, feeling the rightness of it like a key turning in a lock. "I've tried not to feel this way," he admitted roughly. "Tried to tell myself it was inappropriate, that I was taking advantage of the situation. But I cannot help it, Zurga. I wake up looking forward to seeing you. I go to sleep thinking about something funny you said. I find myself planning for a future that includes you, even though I know I have no right to assume you will be part of it." "You have every right," she said fiercely. "I feel the same. When I imagine leaving here, leaving you, it feels like tearing out part of my heart. I thought I would never want to stay in one place, never want to tie myself to anyone after leaving my clan. But this is different. You are different. You see me as a person, not as an orc or a responsibility or a tool to be used. You have given me respect and kindness and a home. And somewhere along the way you gave me your heart, whether you meant to or not, just as I gave you mine." Garrett stood, still holding her hand, and moved around the table. Zurga rose to meet him, and they stood face to face in the candlelight, the winter wind howling softly outside the warm house. "I love you," he said simply, because there were no words more true or necessary. "I know it is complicated. I know the village will never accept it. I know there will be hardship and prejudice and 100 obstacles. But I love you, Zurga, and if you will have me, I want you to stay. Not as my responsibility or my employee, but as my partner, my wife, if you will accept me." Tears glimmered in her amber eyes. "I love you too, Garrett Jennings. And yes, I will stay. I will be your wife, face whatever obstacles come, and build a life here with you." He kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of himself he had not known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "We are going to scandalize the entire village," he said. "Good," Zurga replied with a fierce grin. "They could use a little scandal." They spent the rest of the longest night talking about the future, making plans and stealing kisses between words. When dawn finally came, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold, they stood together at the window and watched the sun rise on their new beginning. The announcement of their intention to marry did indeed scandalize the village. When Garrett rode into town the following week and posted the banns at the meeting hall, the reaction was immediate and hostile. A crowd gathered within the hour, demanding he reconsider, calling him mad, threatening to invalidate the marriage before it could happen. Cornelius, the village elder, called an emergency meeting. Garrett attended alone, having asked Zurga to stay at the farm for her own safety. He stood before the assembled villagers, 40 angry faces demanding he explain himself, and spoke with quiet conviction. "I understand this troubles you. I understand it challenges your beliefs about what is proper and acceptable. But I am a free man on my own land, and Zurga is a free woman who has committed no crime. We love each other, and we will marry whether you approve or not. I had hoped to have your blessing, but I do not require it." "You are bringing shame on this village," Thomas Miller shouted from the back. His son Billy stood beside him, still looking resentful about the incident that had started everything. "Marrying an orc is unnatural." "What is unnatural is tying a woman to a whipping post for defending herself against a thief," Garrett shot back. "What is unnatural is your hatred for someone you do not even know, based solely on the color of her skin and the shape of her teeth. Zurga has lived peacefully on my land for 5 months now. She has committed no violence, caused no trouble, and worked harder than half the men in this room. If you cannot see her worth, that is a failing in you, not in her." "She is an orc," someone else yelled. "They are monsters." "I have fought orcs in battle," Garrett said, his voice rising. "I have also fought alongside them. I have seen human men commit atrocities that would make you weep, and orc warriors show mercy when they had every right to take vengeance. Good and evil are not determined by race. They are determined by choices. Zurga has chosen kindness and peace. What will you choose?" The room fell silent. Cornelius stood from his seat at the head table and studied Garrett with those sharp old eyes. "You truly love her?" the elder asked. "With all my heart." "And she loves you?" "Yes." Cornelius sighed heavily. "I cannot say I approve of this union. It goes against everything I was taught to believe. But you invoked the old law to save her life, and you have kept your word. She has caused no trouble, and I am not in the business of telling free people who they may or may not love." He raised his voice to address the room. "Garrett Jennings has broken no law. If he wishes to marry this orc woman, that is his right. Any who take action against either of them will answer to me. Is that understood?" There was grumbling, but no one openly defied the elder. The meeting dispersed with hostile looks but no violence, and Garrett rode home feeling like he had survived a battle. Zurga met him at the gate, her face tight with worry. "What happened?" "We are free to marry. The elder upheld the law, and the others will not act against his word." Garrett dismounted and pulled her into his arms. "Though I suspect we will not be popular in the village for some time." "I can live with that," Zurga said against his chest, "as long as I can live with you." They married on the first day of spring, with the snow melting and the first green shoots pushing up through the earth. No villagers attended, but Garrett had not expected them to. Instead, they spoke their vows in the small clearing where he had proposed, with only the sky and the trees as witnesses. Garrett had crafted their rings himself, simple bands of silver that gleamed in the morning light. He slipped one onto Zurga's finger and spoke the words that bound them together. "I take you as my wife, my partner, my love. I promise to stand beside you in joy and hardship, to honor you all my days, to build a life with you that is worthy of the love we share. From this day forward, your joys are my joys, your sorrows are my sorrows, and your future is my future." Zurga repeated similar words, her voice strong and clear, and when she slid the ring onto his finger, Garrett felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was meant to be. Against all odds and expectations, they had found each other and chosen each other, and nothing else mattered. "I love you, husband," Zurga said when the vows were complete. "I love you, wife," Garrett replied, and kissed her as the spring sun blessed them with warmth. The seasons turned, and life on the farm continued. They worked side by side through planting and tending and harvest, building not just crops but a genuine partnership. Zurga proved to have a gift for animal husbandry, and she convinced Garrett to expand beyond chickens to include goats and eventually a small herd of cattle. The animals thrived under her care, and their prosperity grew. The village remained cold at first. When Garrett brought produce to market, people bought from him because his goods were excellent, but they kept their distance and rarely spoke beyond what was necessary for commerce. Zurga never accompanied him on these trips, both to avoid confrontation and because she had no desire to subject herself to hostile stares. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with the children, as it often did. A young girl named Emma, daughter of the blacksmith, got lost in the woods near Garrett's property one autumn afternoon. Zurga found her crying beneath an oak tree and brought her safely home, even giving the child her own cloak when the girl was shivering with cold. The blacksmith, a gruff man named Thomas who had been among the loudest voices of disapproval, came to the farm the next day. He stood awkwardly at the gate, turning his cap in his hands until Garrett came out to meet him. "My daughter told me what your wife did," Thomas said without preamble. "I came to say thank you, and to say I was wrong about her, about orcs in general maybe. I judged without knowing, and that was not right. It was a small moment, but it mattered. Word spread, as word always did in small villages." A few weeks later, a woman from the village came to ask Zurga's advice about a sick cow. Then a young man wanted to know if she could teach him her technique for training draft animals. Each interaction was cautious at first, but Zurga met every overture with patience and dignity, never throwing past hostility back in anyone's face. By the time the second spring arrived, the ice had thawed considerably. Garrett and Zurga were invited to the village spring festival, the first public event they had been welcome at since the wedding. They arrived uncertain of their reception and found themselves greeted with tentative smiles and even a few friendly conversations. "People are capable of change," Zurga said that night as they walked home under the stars, "when they are given the chance to see beyond their prejudices." "You made that possible," Garrett said, taking her hand. "You could have been bitter. You could have hated them for how they treated you. Instead, you showed them grace." "I learned from the best," she replied, squeezing his fingers. That summer brought the first test of the community's changing attitudes. A group of raiders attacked a farm on the village's eastern border, the same kind of human bandits who had plagued the region for years. The village militia was formed quickly, and Garrett was asked to join given his military experience. He agreed, but insisted on one condition. "Zurga comes with us. She is strong, skilled in combat, and has better tracking abilities than anyone here. If you want to stop these raiders, you need her help." There was resistance, but the urgency of the situation won out. Zurga joined the militia, and together they tracked the raiders to their camp in the hills. The battle was brief but brutal. Zurga fought with controlled ferocity, protecting the men beside her and demonstrating both her skill and her restraint. When the raiders were defeated, she was the one who found the stolen livestock and returned them to their owner. The farmer, an old man named Samuel who had lost his wife to orc raiders decades ago, looked at Zurga with tears in his eyes. "I thought all orcs were murderers," he said quietly. "I thought I would hate your kind until I died. But you saved my animals. You saved my farm. I was wrong, and I am sorry." Zurga clasped his hand gently. "Hate is a heavy burden. I am glad you can set it down." After that, acceptance came more easily. Zurga was invited to join the village's harvest cooperative. She became the person people sought out for advice about animal care and difficult problems that required both strength and intelligence. Children no longer ran from her but waved and asked if she had any stories about the mountains. 2 years after their marriage, Zurga told Garrett she was pregnant. He wept with joy, holding her close and marveling at the miracle of it. Their daughter was born in the spring, with green-tinged skin lighter than her mother's, small tusks that were barely visible, and her father's blue eyes. They named her Mara after Garrett's grandmother. The village celebrated the birth with genuine warmth. Gifts appeared at their door, baby clothes and blankets and toys. When Garrett brought Mara to the village for the first time, cradled in his arms, the women gathered around to coo over her and offer advice. The children wanted to see the baby, and their parents no longer pulled them away. "She is beautiful," Cornelia said, peering at Mara with a soft smile. "A bridge between worlds. May she grow up knowing only love." "We will make sure of it," Zurga said firmly, and Garrett nodded his agreement. Mara grew strong and bright, beloved by both her parents and the community. She played with the village children without anyone remarking on her differences. She learned farming from Garrett and tracking from Zurga, and became a bridge indeed. Proof that love could transcend prejudice and create something beautiful. On Mara's 5th birthday, Garrett and Zurga stood together in the field behind their house, watching their daughter chase butterflies with her friends. The farm had grown over the years, prosperous and productive. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family and the occasional guests who now visited regularly. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked, taking Zurga's hand as he had done 1,000 times before. "Staying here instead of going to the coast like you planned?" Zurga looked at him with those amber eyes that still made his heart race. "Not for a single moment. I found everything I needed right here: purpose, home, love, a family. What could the coast possibly offer that would compare?" "Nothing," Garrett agreed, pulling her close. "Absolutely nothing." They stood together in the warm sunshine, watching their daughter laugh with joy, and Garrett thought back to that morning in the village square 5 years ago. He had acted on instinct and moral conviction, never imagining it would lead to this perfect moment. Never imagining that saving one woman from injustice would change his entire life, would teach a village to see beyond its prejudices, would create a family that embodied hope and possibility. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Zurga asked. "For trusting me, for loving me, for building this life with me." He kissed her temple gently. "For being exactly who you are." "I could say the same to you," Zurga replied, leaning into his embrace. "You saw me when everyone else saw only a monster. You chose compassion when others chose cruelty. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Garrett corrected. "That is what love means." Mara came running up then, breathless and grinning, holding out a fistful of wildflowers she had picked. "For you, Mama." Zurga took the flowers with exaggerated reverence, bending to kiss her daughter's forehead. "They are beautiful, little one. Shall we put them in water?" "Yes, and then can Papa tell the story again, about how you met?" Garrett laughed. "You have heard that story 100 times, but I like it," Mara insisted. "It is the best story ever." "Very well," Garrett agreed, scooping his daughter up and settling her on his shoulders. "It starts with a very stupid boy who tried to rob a very clever orc woman." As they walked back to the house, Zurga holding the flowers and Garrett carrying Mara, the three of them laughing together, the sun began to set over the farm. The wheat swayed golden in the fields they had planted together. The animals settled into their pens for the night. Smoke rose from distant chimneys in the village where people who had once been enemies were now friends. The world was not perfect. Prejudice still existed, and there would always be those who could not see past differences. But here, on this farm in this family, two people had proven that love was stronger than hate, that courage could change hearts, and that choosing compassion in the face of cruelty could create miracles. Years continued to pass, each season bringing its own joys and challenges. Garrett's hair began to silver at the temples, and laugh lines deepened around Zurga's eyes. Mara grew tall and strong, eventually taking over much of the farm work as her parents aged. She inherited her mother's gift with animals and her father's steady patience, becoming known throughout the region as someone who could solve problems others found insurmountable. When Mara was 17, a young man from a neighboring village came courting. He was human, the son of a carpenter, with kind eyes and gentle hands. He treated Mara with respect and devotion, never once mentioning her orc heritage as anything but another wonderful part of who she was. Garrett approved of him immediately, while Zurga subjected him to a series of tests that he passed with good humor and determination. "He reminds me of someone," Zurga said one evening after the young man had left following dinner. "Someone who saw past surfaces to the person underneath. Someone brave enough to stand against prejudice for what he believed was right." Garrett smiled. "Are you saying I should approve the match?" "I am saying our daughter has excellent taste. She found someone who will love her the way you love me. That is all any parent can hope for." Mara married her carpenter the following spring, in the same clearing where Garrett and Zurga had exchanged their vows. This time, though, the clearing was filled with witnesses. Half the village attended, along with friends from neighboring settlements, and even a delegation from Zurga's old clan who had heard of her success and come to see if the rumors of peaceful coexistence were true. The mountain orcs arrived uncertain and suspicious, but they left thoughtful. They saw Zurga thriving, loved and respected. They saw Mara celebrated by humans and orcs alike. They saw a community that had learned to look beyond old hatreds. When they departed, their leader, an older woman named Graka who had once been Zurga's mentor, pulled her aside for a private conversation. "I told you that you were foolish to leave," Graka said gruffly. "I told you that humans would never accept you, that you were betraying your people. I was wrong. You found something here that we lost in the mountains: peace, purpose. A way forward that does not require endless conflict. I am proud of you, Zurga, more proud than I can say." Zurga embraced her old mentor with tears in her eyes. "Come visit again, bring others. Let them see what is possible when we choose understanding over fear." "I will," Graka promised. "Things are changing in the mountains too, slowly but changing. Your example gives us hope that another way exists." As the years turned and Garrett and Zurga grew older, their farm became a symbol of possibility. Young people, both human and orc, came to work and learn. Some stayed, building their own homes on the edges of Garrett's land with his blessing, creating a small community of those who believed in coexistence. The village expanded to include them, and within a generation, mixed marriages were no longer scandalous but simply another thread in the community's fabric. Garrett's health began to fail in his 63rd year. He had lived a good life, worked hard, loved deeply, but the years caught up with everyone eventually. Zurga tended him with fierce devotion, and he bore his decline with patience, grateful for every moment he had been given. On a warm autumn evening, with the fields golden with harvest and the house full of grandchildren's laughter, Garrett lay in the bed he had shared with Zurga for more than 30 years. She sat beside him, holding his hand, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him. "I have had a good life," he said quietly, his voice weakened but content. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Thank you for sharing it with me." "We are not finished yet," Zurga said, her voice fierce even as tears tracked down her cheeks. "You are strong, You will recover. Perhaps. But if not, I want you to know that every moment with you was a gift. You made me better. You taught me that love is the greatest courage." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me you will not mourn too long. Promise me you will keep living fully, surrounded by our family and friends." "I promise," Zurga whispered. "But you are not leaving me yet, I forbid it." Garrett smiled, the expression soft and full of love, still giving orders, always. He rallied over the following weeks, regaining some strength. The illness retreated but never fully left, and both of them knew it would return. They made the most of the time they had, taking slow walks around the farm, sitting together in comfortable silence, sharing memories with their children and grandchildren. When the end came 2 years later, it was peaceful. Garrett died in his sleep with Zurga beside him, having lived to see his 65th year and more happiness than most men dared dream of. The village mourned him genuinely, gathering for a funeral that celebrated a life well lived and love that had changed an entire community. Zurga continued on, missing him terribly, but honoring her promise to live fully. She spent her remaining years surrounded by family, teaching her grandchildren the old orc songs from the mountains and the farming wisdom Garrett had taught her. She told stories of the day they met, of the choice that had changed everything, of the love that had proven stronger than prejudice. When she died peacefully in her sleep 12 years after Garrett, she was laid to rest beside him in the clearing that had witnessed their marriage. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore an inscription chosen by their children. They chose love over fear and changed the world. The farm continued through the generations, always in the family, always a symbol of what was possible when courage and compassion met. The clearing where Garrett and Zurga were buried became a sacred place, visited by couples of all kinds who wanted to honor the legacy of two people who had proven that love recognizes no boundaries. The village that had once wanted to whip an orc woman became known throughout the region as a place of tolerance and acceptance, where humans and orcs lived and worked together without rancor. Children grew up hearing the story of Garrett and Zurga, learning from their example that kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for someone everyone else has condemned. And in the farmhouse that Garrett had built and Zurga had helped expand, their great-great-grandchildren gathered around the kitchen table, eating meals prepared with vegetables from the same garden their ancestors had tended. They laughed and argued and loved each other, humans and orcs and everything in between, living proof that the choice one farmer made on a terrible morning had rippled forward through time, creating waves of change that would never fully cease. The whipping post in the village square had long since been torn down and burned, its wood scattered to ash and memory. But the story of what happened there lived on, passed from parent to child, generation after generation, a reminder that in the space between the raising of the whip and the fall of the lash, there is room for courage to intervene and change everything. Garrett had seen injustice and refused to accept it. Zurga had been given a chance and seized it with both hands. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of hatred, proving that love was not just an emotion but a choice, a daily commitment to see the person in front of you and value them for who they truly were. Their legacy was not just in the children they raised or the farm they built, but in the hearts they changed and the world they helped reshape. Every person who chose compassion over cruelty, understanding over prejudice, love over fear, walked in the path they had forged. The sun set over the farm as it had done countless times before, painting the fields in gold and amber light. The wheat swayed in the evening breeze. The house stood strong and welcoming. And somewhere in that clearing among the trees, if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, you could almost hear laughter and the murmur of two voices speaking words of love that had echoed down through the years, as eternal and unchanging as the land itself. This was the story of how Garrett Jennings cut down an orc woman named Zurga from a whipping post and changed both their lives forever. It was a story of courage and compassion, of love that transcended boundaries, of two people who found each other against impossible odds and built something that lasted long after they were gone. It was, in the end, simply a story of love. And love, as Garrett and Zurga proved, was always enough.